my fellow thrill seekers. Are you ready to join me on a bone-chilling journey into the mysterious world beyond? Today, I have a collection of real-life tales to share with you, straight from the lips of an embalmer who has witnessed the horrors of the afterlife. But beware, these stories are not for the faint-hearted. So, make yourselves comfortable, but don't get too comfortable, and be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. Your support is what fuels us to keep bringing you these spine-tingling tales. Let's prepare to enter the unexplored territory of the dead together. Are you ready?
Have you ever wondered what becomes of a soul that departs this world but refuses to leave? Do you believe in second chances after death, or do you think that some spirits are trapped in a realm where the deceased consume their life force? As an embalmer and mortician, I've seen it all. I've encountered ghosts who were unaware of their demise and begged for aid. And tonight, I want to share with you some of the spine-chilling experiences that I've had. Although I have since resigned from my job, I have personal knowledge of the horrors of the hereafter. I'd like to tell you 3 true stories that occurred to me. I understand that you may not think I'm telling the truth, but I beg you to try. I can attest that all of these occurrences are accurate since they occurred to me. I tell you these stories to warn you rather than to frighten you. We must always keep in mind that life does not stop with death. There is an afterlife, although nothing is known about it. We shall be evaluated based on our deeds in this life when we get there. It is crucial that we understand this reality and conduct our lives accordingly. Let's start with the first story now. This experience happened 2 years ago. I had an experience that still haunts me to this day. I was working in a funeral home when they brought in a little girl to be embalmed. Her condition was so deplorable and sad that it stirred something inside me. I had to embalm her immediately because the authorities needed the death certificate. The owner of the funeral home instructed me to proceed with the embalming immediately and that the girl's parents would bring her clothes later. When I was in the midst of the embalming process, the owner of the funeral home barged in, looking as pale as a ghost. She whispered to me that the girl's parents were devil worshippers and wanted their daughter to be dressed in a black gown with no undergarments. Dread filled my heart as I thought of what that poor child might have suffered before her demise. But I had no choice but to follow her orders and dress her in black. After finishing my work, I left the funeral home and headed home. But on the way, my friend Amelia called and urged me to tell my daughter to go to bed at once because it was too late for her to be awake. I was puzzled, as it was odd for my daughter to be playing in the wee hours of the morning, but Amelia knew she was still awake. Upon arriving home, I found my daughter playing with someone in her room. She told me that a little girl had come to play with her. A chill ran down my spine as I realized who the girl might be. Amelia quickly contacted a psychic who instructed me to put a glass of salt water in my daughter's room. If salt came out of the glass, it meant that there was a spirit present. As soon as I put the glass in the room, the atmosphere became foul and reeked of putrefaction. Meanwhile, the glass of salt water was drying out and the salt was coming out of the rim of the glass as the seer had warned me. This only made me more worried. I knew then that I had brought the spirit of the little girl from the funeral home to my house. My heart raced, and I didn't know what to do. I took hold of my daughter, gathered my courage, and spoke to the girl's spirit. I pleaded with her to communicate with me if she had something to say. I promised to help her in any way possible, but I implored her to leave my daughter alone. All of a sudden, a gust of frigid wind swept through me, chilling me to the bone. I knew that the girl's spirit was still present. I spoke to her with as much kindness as I could muster, asking her to seek the light and move on. After a few moments, the air stilled and the foul stench vanished. This experience has stuck with me, haunting me to this day. I am grateful that I was able to help the little girl's spirit find peace, but I hope to never encounter such a terrifying situation again. The incident taught me a valuable lesson that the dead should be left in peace and not brought home with us. The following story happened as I stood in the darkness of the amphitheater. Many mourners have stopped by our funeral home to say goodbye to their loved ones. Just behind me is a wall separating the dressing room from the room where my other colleagues labored tirelessly in the cold storage section where the dead languish waiting to be embalmed. We've become used to unusual events in our line of work. Others stick with you long after the funeral is finished, while others are quickly disregarded. Being an embalmer is a harsh reality, and being surrounded by the dead makes it difficult not to think about how transitory life is. It's not uncommon to receive the bodies of those who have passed in tragic circumstances. Victims of war or natural disasters, each with a story to tell. As an embalmer, it's my responsibility to help guide them through their grief or find answers for them. But sometimes, even the most experienced among us encounters something that leaves us shaken to the core. Something that reminds us that the dead aren't always at rest and that we should always be wary of what might be lurking in the shadows. As an embalmer, I know how important it is to not ignore the messages left by the deceased, even when it comes to legal issues. The stories of those who pass away from natural causes should never be forgotten. But what about the victims of senseless mass killings? Have you ever encountered the aftermath of a cold-blooded murderer? Multiple examinations are required to confirm the cause of death in such cases, and time is of the essence. A few years ago, while on duty, a bag was brought into the lobby that sent shivers down my spine. The evidence pointed to a need for urgent action, so I couldn't afford to waste any time. It was so late that I decided to take a quick break and brew myself a cup of coffee before getting to work. When I returned to the bag and opened it, what I saw surprised me. It was a tiny body, badly damaged all over. My first thought was that it was the result of a terrible accident or neglect. But as I examined the lifeless body, my heart sank even more. The little boy had met a tragic and violent end. What chilled me to the bone, however, was what I saw when I looked into her eyes. There was a haunting glow, a message left by a soul gone too soon. When I questioned my colleagues and read the report, I discovered that the mother of this innocent child was accused of the girl's death. Incidents like these make me aware of the atrocities that exist in the world from which even the dead cannot escape. And as embalmers, it is our responsibility to give them a voice and see that justice is done even in death. Nothing could have prepared me for this, although I have seen my share of disasters in my profession as an embalmer. Dealing with a deceased person is difficult enough, but when there is a child, grief takes on a whole new dimension. It's hard to understand how anyone could be so cruel to a helpless child. And as I worked on its tiny body, tears streamed down my face. The pain this creature must have gone through before she died was unimaginable. I don't have psychic abilities, nor am I psychic or anything like that, but I believe that the dead can speak to us in their own way. And this little girl was crying out to me to do something about the injustice that had been done to her. I may not have the ability to revive the dead, but I can at least try to help them, making sure that their final fate is done with respect and dignity. And in this case, I was going to do everything in my power to see that the little girl received the justice she deserved. The little girl's left arm was broken, bruises covered her entire body, and cuts and scratches adorned her like badges of suffering. I couldn't help but wonder what had happened to her and what kind of monster could do this to a little girl. The little girl's feet were dusty and unkempt, as if she hadn't worn shoes in years. Her little body was broken, and her spirit was broken. I couldn't imagine the kind of person she lived with, the one who had left her so dirty and abused. As I began to make the diagnosis, I could see her ribs, and my heart broke. I sprayed her with water, trying to loosen the crusts of dirt and grime that had accumulated on her. But as I tried to fix her hair, I noticed the severe concussion that had knocked the wind out of her. The blow had snapped her in two, and I couldn't help but ask, "But what happened to you?" After the procedure, I began to fill out the corresponding paperwork on my desk, and then I felt a shiver run down my back. It was as if something was watching me, something malevolent. I didn't want to think too much, so I turned on the radio. It was an old radio that needed new batteries from time to time, but it was better than nothing. While I worked, the music helped me relax. It's strange, but sometimes things happen that are hard to explain when the dead want to communicate with you. That's what happened to my little radio that night. When I went to change the batteries, I heard a faint voice saying, "You again?" I thought it was just my imagination, and I looked for the radio batteries in an extra set I had in the drawer, but I couldn't find them. But something wasn't right. The radio was turning on and off by itself. I tried to ignore it and concentrate on my work, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. And then I heard it again. The little radio was trying to turn on, even though I hadn't changed the batteries. It was a terrifying sensation, and I immediately felt a shiver run down my spine. I got from my chair and went to check the radio, but it kept turning on and off randomly. I couldn't explain it, but my instinct told me something was wrong. Was it my imagination, or was there something else? As I tried to make sense of it all, I couldn't help but think about the little girl lying on the table. Was all this happening while she was still there? I was getting tired, and I couldn't take it anymore. I tried to turn off the radio, but it wouldn't stop. The more I tried, the more it persisted. It was as if a supernatural force was controlling it. Finally, I gave up and put the radio back in its place before leaving. But as I took a few steps, the radio fell to the floor with a thud. It was as if something was trying to get my attention, and I didn't know what to do. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I knew something was wrong. The night was getting stranger and stranger. I could feel it in the air, the energy around me. It was thick and heavy, as if something was hovering in the shadows. I couldn't shake the feeling that what was happening was beyond my control. So I decided to let go and see where it took me. I grabbed my trusty radio, but something stopped me. Instead, I slowly and cautiously made my way to where the little girl was. She was the center of all the strange happenings. I could feel it in my bones. As I got closer, I could see that she was lying very still on the table. I tried to calm her down by running my fingers softly over her hair. I promised her that everything would be okay and that wherever she went would be preferable to where she was. However, she didn't seem to hear me. I heard footsteps in the small office to the left of the area before the cold storage rooms where the information desk is located. My attention was drawn to the left side, that is, to the space in front of the cold storage rooms. My colleagues had already left, but I could feel the footsteps of someone walking through the room like small children running barefoot. It was then that I realized that the footsteps belonged to the little girl who was running through the corridors barefoot. I was filled with terror and immediately stood up to run away, but when I turned my face, the little girl was looking me in the eyes, and I was paralyzed. With all the fear that gripped me, I plucked up my courage and stammered, "Daughter, what are you looking for?" I asked, but got no answer. There was a painful silence. Suddenly, I was aware of the emptiness that surrounded us. It seemed as if we were the last two people left on Earth. The girl turned around, and without saying anything to me, I knew she wanted me to follow her. Not knowing very well where we were going, I followed the girl. Because of the darkness, the shadows seemed to move and change around us. I couldn't shake the impression that something was lurking in the shadows. But I had to keep chasing the girl. She was my only chance to understand what was happening. I experienced a shiver as we moved. My breath lingered in the air like a fog, and it seemed as if the temperature had dropped drastically. Then it dawned on me, a shadowy figure just outside my field of vision. I realized that I had missed a lot. I had gone too far in my pursuit of the girl, and now I was surrounded by something abominable in pitch darkness. A shiver ran down my spine as soon as I heard the choppy speech through my little radio. It seemed as if the sound was emanating from somewhere other than the radio itself. I heard a garbled sound that I didn't understand. It was like the voice of someone mocking me. Then I heard the voice of a sobbing little girl looking for her mother. Her sobs quickly turned into screams that could be heard over the radio as soon as she discovered that her mother was not there. Only the girl's cries could be heard when the radio suddenly went silent. I was so startled that I turned on all the lights in the room to feel calmer. Then I saw a handprint on the top of the glass of the door, as if someone had been watching me from outside. The little girl, perhaps, frantically looking for the only person who had been good to her. I could not ignore the feeling that I was not alone. I had to go back to the room where the little lifeless corpse of the girl was. She was still. I heard a voice whispering in my ear, "They will come for you soon." Then I knew I had to leave immediately and not look back. Just as I was about to leave, I heard a voice coming from the cold chambers. A little girl was screaming for her mother. The fact that the girl was still among the dead made me faint. I could not abandon her in that situation. I decided to go and look for her, but the temperature dropped sharply as I approached the ice chambers. I could hear strange murmurs all around me, and the air seemed heavy and thick. The little girl was alone, huddled in a corner, and very frightened. Fear was creeping over me. Suddenly, I realized that we were not alone in that place. Something ominous and evil was watching us from the shadows. I knew I had to get out of there, but I had the feeling that someone was watching me as I made my way through the poorly lit corridors of the morgue. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end as I tried to tell myself that it was all in my head. I walked through the door of the examination room and found the girl crying again. I said, my voice shaking, "You're going to be fine, daughter," even though the lump in my throat made my voice crack twice and the girl's figure vanished. This event marked my life, and I couldn't get it out of my head until now. Knowing what happens to people who don't have a dignified death stuns me. What happened to the girl's spirit is something only God knows. The next day, the girl's father showed up to claim her corpse. I didn't say anything about what had happened the night before with his daughter's body, nor did I expect any explanation, nor did I simply ask him to sign some papers and then remove the body. Within minutes, I was in my car and heading home. The events of the day dominated my thoughts, and I was sure that I would never forget this experience. I couldn't help but reflect on the brevity of life and the suffering that comes with death as I showered before going to my children's rooms to hug them. Listen closely, for this is the last story I will tell you. It happened when I was just starting my job as an embalmer and knew nothing of the paranormal phenomena that lurked in this line of work. The job was not well regarded by the common people, but fate had led me to it. As an embalmer, my duty was to prepare the deceased in the best way possible so that they could be bid farewell by their loved ones with dignity. However, we are few, and sometimes the bodies had to remain in the freezers for hours or even days before we could embalm them. One afternoon, the owner of the funeral home asked me to go to the morgue to pick up a body that had been in one of the freezers for some time. I received some references and immediately set off to retrieve the body. I thought it would be a simple procedure, like any other I had done in the past, but something strange was going to happen. When I arrived at the morgue, I gave the necessary documents to the people in charge, who directed me to a small office near the freezers. The atmosphere was gloomy, but that was normal for someone who worked with deads. I waited for several minutes before they allowed me to enter and remove the body, but nothing happened. Time passed, and they still did not tell me anything. I was surprised and decided to approach the area of the freezers without authorization to ask what was going on. One of them approached me and apologized for the delay, but explained that the corpse I was supposed to retrieve was one of several people whose bodies had been in the same compartment for several months. It was difficult to identify each of them since they had no identification at the time of their deaths. This explanation seemed illogical to me, as it was standard procedure for corpses to have some form of identification to make locating them easier. I spoke to the proprietor of the funeral home right away and let him know about the peculiar circumstance. He added that the corpse I was to recover had a little tattoo that would help with identification on its neck. I kept having the impression that something was very wrong as I walked up to the freezer. I managed to find the corpse in question with the help of the attendants. It displayed the odd tattoo the owner had stated, identifying the wearer as a member of a certain religious cult. But it was the way the corpse looked that scared me. It resembled a well-preserved Egyptian mummy, yet there was something about the corpse's face that suggested a terrible demise. As soon as I recognized the corpse, I told the staff to put it in a bag and transport it to the funeral home right away. They did what I asked and placed the corpse in the bag and on the mobile stretcher. Before they left, however, they urged me to hold out a little longer while they completed the transfer-related paperwork. I had no choice but to wait next to the body. As someone who regularly works with the dead, I am not afraid of being near a corpse or of being alone in a room with it. But this time, something was different. Something was off. Something was calling my attention. As I waited, I began to feel a putrid smell that made me feel sick to my stomach. At first, I thought the smell might be coming from outside or from somewhere else in the room, but to my surprise, it was coming from the corpse. How was this possible? We had just taken it out of the freezer, and the body was very dry. Something was not right here. I immediately called the people in charge, and they too smelled the same nauseating odor. We couldn't think of anything else to do but return the corpse to the freezer again. The whole situation was very strange. I contacted the funeral home again and reported the situation to the owner. But instead of showing concern or offering help, he simply told me to do everything possible to move the body to the funeral home. He insisted that the service had already been paid for and that the family would come to pick up the body promptly. As I left the room, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The whole situation was eerie and unsettling. I couldn't wait to get out of there and leave that corpse behind. I pride myself on my ability to handle my fears, especially when it comes to the dead. But when I caught a whiff of that nauseating and inexplicable smell, I knew I was in trouble. If it were like this now, I couldn't imagine how difficult it would be to embalm him. I couldn't fathom how a body that was nearly frozen could emit such a putrid odor. There was no logical explanation except that some unknown substance had been injected into the body. I turned to the people in charge, asking if that could be the explanation. One of them, with a stuttering voice, finally revealed the truth. "Sir, we lied to you. We apologize. The reason for the delay in attending to you is not because we couldn't identify the corpse, but because none of us wanted to handle it due to that foul smell. No one can explain it." I begged them to give me an oxygen balloon with a mask so I could embalm the body right then and there. They reluctantly agreed. Time was running out, and I couldn't risk waiting any longer. As I prepared to carry out the embalming procedure inside the morgue, I returned to the environment where the corpse was inside the bag. When I opened it, I felt a sensation that the corpse was still alive. It was a strange feeling that I had experienced in other situations, but this time it seemed more real. Something wasn't right. Despite the ominous feeling in the air, I pushed on with the embalming. As I worked, I couldn't shake the sensation that the corpse was watching me, waiting for its chance to strike. But I knew that couldn't be true. It was just my overactive imagination playing tricks on me. I prepared my materials and asked the funeral home to send me the clothes to put on the corpse. As I was getting ready, I felt an inexplicable sensation all through my back. It was as if they had injected me with liquid nitrogen. I felt some fear, and something told me not to turn around. The fear that was awakening in me began to paralyze me, and I could not make any movement. Although I had the mask with the oxygen on my face, I clearly felt that nauseating smell again. In front of me, there was a small window in the upper part of the wall. Something told me to look there. I looked up slowly with an indescribable fear, and in the reflection of the glass, I could clearly see the reflection of the corpse sitting on the stretcher looking at me. My legs began to tremble, and I felt that they were losing strength. I started to stagger and realized that I lacked the strength to run away from there. Most likely, if I tried to move, I would fall to the floor and have no option but to escape. What to do? Fear consumed me like never before. As I said before, I had already seen spirits trying to communicate with me, but seeing a corpse come to life is something that no one will believe. Such was my fear that I had even forgotten the terrible smell that I felt there. That's when I saw the window glass again, and I saw the corpse inside the bag as it was at the beginning. It was at that moment that one of the people in charge of the morgue entered the room where I was, bringing the clothes of the deceased. He approached me, saw me sweating coldly, and asked me what had happened. The only thing I could say was to grab my arm and help me get out of there. I couldn't explain to him what I had just experienced. I knew he wouldn't believe me anyway. But one thing was for sure, I would never forget that horrifying experience, and I would always wonder if it was just my imagination or if I had come face to face with something truly supernatural. The staff was aware of what had occurred, and they weren't afraid to inquire as to what. But I couldn't get the courage to respond. My body was drenched in cold perspiration, my heart was pounding, and my mouth felt dry. I was limited to pleading with them to remove me from the situation. They didn't need much convincing. They led me outside, where I finally found my voice. I told them what had happened to me and how I had felt a presence that I couldn't explain. That's when one of them spoke up. He said that he had recently heard a similar story that another colleague had told him about one of the corpses that was still alive because he had noticed certain movements inside the freezer. But no one believed him saying that what he had seen was a figment of his imagination. But now, with my experience, they were convinced that what the other fellow told them was true, that something paranormal was happening there, something they could not explain. And that story gave me a great chill. I returned to the funeral home, my mind still reeling from what had just happened. The owner of the funeral home could see that something was wrong, and I knew I couldn't keep it to myself any longer. I told him everything that had happened, every detail that still haunted me. The owner of the funeral home gave me some credit for what I was telling him because he told me that one of the people who requested the service for that corpse had told him that the body could not be removed from the morgue before because that person died in strange circumstances while practicing some black magic rituals, and that the police prevented them from removing it from the morgue until the investigations on his death were concluded. Normally I don't ask who the person I am going to embalm is, but I was stunned by what the owner had just told me. It made me reflect on the consequences that occult practices can cause, and especially think about the fate of that poor wretch who still can't leave his rotting body because of his bad deeds in life. After listening to him, I complained about why he did not warn me about that, to which the owner simply told me that for him, that was just one more of the many stories that are told. I got a little upset and asked him to excuse me from the day's work and that I needed to take a vacation. But the truth was, I knew I could never go back to that job. I thought I was prepared for anything. I had seen enough paranormal situations to handle anything that came my way. But nothing had prepared me for what I had just experienced. Nowadays, I spend my time on things that are more related to living. My previous job taught me a lot about respect for the deceased and how they still have a life beyond this plane. Some of them are trapped here for reasons that we can't even begin to understand. It's a haunting reminder that our journey doesn't end when we die and that our actions in life have a ripple effect on our afterlife. I hope my story helps you reflect on the importance of respecting the dead and how our actions in life can have a profound impact on the world beyond.
Thank you for joining me on this bone-chilling journey into the mysterious world beyond. I hope these real-life tales from an embalmer have left you with a newfound appreciation for the afterlife. If you enjoyed these spine-tingling stories and want more, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell to never miss an episode. Your support keeps us fueled and ready to bring you more hair-raising tales from the world beyond. Until next time, my fellow thrill-seekers, stay curious and keep exploring the unknown. Farewell.